Real Pive. The next morning, I woke up early, but S-Sensei had already finished her morning prayers. Good morning, T. Go wash your face and have breakfast. After breakfast, we'll head to the main temple. I'm not directly involved, so I won't write too much about it, but just a bit. The sect S-Sensei belongs to is very historical, as I mentioned before, and there are believers and practitioners all over Japan. The teachings are the same, but due to geographical reasons, there are main temples in both the east and west. I was taken to the main temple in the west. Sensei explained that I would be staying at the main temple for a while to enhance the virtues I originally possessed, which I still can't explain, and to help the spirit pass on peacefully through the rituals at the main temple. My grandmother was the happiest to hear this, while my father still seemed doubtful. In the end, he didn't oppose it because I told him, "I'll be fine. I'm going." When we arrived at the main temple, a young person was waiting to greet us and greeted S-Sensei respectfully. We were taken to a building next to the main hall. It was so large and magnificent that calling it a cottage doesn't do it justice, where I greeted the people of the main temple. They also showed great respect towards S-Sensei. I later learned that S-Sensei was actually a highly esteemed person and could have held a very high position if she wanted to. It's sad, but hierarchies do form, Sensei said. I stayed at the main temple for a while, and although I was treated as a guest, I lived a similar lifestyle to everyone else there. This was probably because of S-Sensei's recommendation. During my stay there, I realized how truly fortunate I was. There were people who had been suffering from a vengeful snake spirit for 40 years, or people whose families had fallen into ruin due to curses, leaving them with no relatives, even though they were descendants of distinguished samurai families. I didn't know there were so many people suffering much more than I was. Whether it was because of the harsh life, the place itself, or S-Sensei's words, my fear had greatly diminished, though I still occasionally felt as if it was nearby and got quite scared. About a month after I started staying at the main temple, S-Sensei visited. "Oh my, you seem to be doing much better." "Yes, thanks to you, Sensei." "Have you seen it since then?" "No, not once. I think it either moved on or went somewhere else, since this is the main temple." "That's not the case, you know?" My face stiffened. "Oh, I'm sorry, that must have scared you again." "But you see, T, there are many people suffering here. Our job is to help as many of them as we can." I think S-Sensei's words included it as well. "T, stay here a bit longer and study. It's a valuable opportunity." I followed S-Sensei's advice. I was still dealing with the aftermath of what had happened, and I wanted to stay there a bit longer. Plus, although the days went by quickly, I liked the feeling that time was flowing slowly. It sounds contradictory, but that's how it felt. Eventually, I ended up staying for 3 months. During that time, S-Sensei didn't visit again after coming 2 months ago. Without S-Sensei's words, I felt uneasy. However, after being isolated from the noisy world I was used to for 3 months, I started to feel a bit restless. After 2 months, S-Sensei finally came again, signaling the end of my time at the main temple. I got ready, thanked everyone who had helped me individually, and prepared to leave with S-Sensei. But then I noticed that S-Sensei, who had been beside me, was no longer there. When I turned around, she was a little behind. Thinking I might have walked too fast, I went back to her, and with a kind face, she said, "T, why don't you stay here instead of leaving?" I felt a bit happy, thinking that Sensei had recognized me. "No, I can't do what the people here do. They are amazing. I don't think I can imitate them," I replied shyly. S-Sensei said, "No, it's not that. I mean, you shouldn't leave yet." "What?" "Because there's still something left." My face stiffened again. In the end, I didn't leave the main temple for another 2 months. I ended up staying there for a total of 5 months. I doubt I'll ever have another experience where someone, not even family, takes care of me for such a long time. Sensei told me, "I think you're probably fine now, but come back once a month for a while." She said this because we couldn't be sure if it had disappeared or was just hiding. After my long stay at the main temple, I finally returned to my normal life. My mother had taken care of the move-out procedures for my apartment, and my belongings had been moved to my family home. When my mother opened the apartment room, there was a smell as if something had been smoked, and small insects were gathered on the floor in the middle of the room. It was too scary for her, so she left without doing anything that day. The next day, she decided to go back and open the room again. The smell was still there, but the insects were gone. I felt sorry for my mother, but I was glad I didn't have to see it myself. When I returned home, I checked my phone for the first time in about 6 months. I hadn't felt the need to before. There were an overwhelming number of missed calls and emails. The most frequent ones were from Manu. From the emails, it was clear that he felt responsible for what had happened and was filled with guilt. He frequently sent apologies, suggestions on what to do, and information about people who could help. My mother told me that Malid had even come to the house. On the second night after my return, I called Bor. There was a lot of noise on the other end of the line, and I couldn't understand what he was saying because he was slurring his words. He was at a party. I hung up and sent a text saying, "I'll kill you." Ultimately, people remained detached from each other's problems. The next day, I received an email from Before asking if he could meet to apologize. He didn't call because he probably felt awkward. That night, Thadherd came to the house. Coming all the way from such a distance showed how much he regretted and reflected on his actions. The main reason he came at night was that I didn't want to go out at night, needless to say. As soon as I opened the door and saw Bor, I punched him twice, once to ease his guilt and once to atone for going to a party and irritating me. Sometimes getting punched feels more relieving than words of forgiveness. Well, the second punch was more for my personal anger. I explained everything in detail to Daughter, and that night we spent time together feeling both excited and scared. Looking back, it was just an ordinary day. I heard from Malid Strmaler what happened that night after I left. When they fled, it was clear that Hayashi was acting strangely. Hoon, who had been waiting in the car with his friend, immediately realized that something was seriously wrong. But Hayashi's panic when he jumped into the back seat was so intense that they had no choice but to drive away. If we resisted or hesitated, who knows what he might have done, said, describing the situation. Netter explained that he escaped when the car was stopped at a red light near the highway entrance, away from my house. He started laughing, trembling, saying, "I'm not like that, or I wouldn't do such a thing," and it scared me. The image of it whispering came back to me, and I struggled to erase it from my mind. Didn't come back to my house simply because he was too scared. He apologized, saying, "I'm sorry for being a coward," and I forgave him. I wouldn't have been able to handle it either if I were him. No one knows what happened to Hayashi after that. Understandably furious, confronted the friend who introduced Hayashi. It turned out that Hayashi was a hopeless case, not even skilled enough to be a proper con artist. He had been persuaded to introduce Hayashi on a whim, thinking it would be an easy way to make some pocket money. Nader said, "I made sure to rough him up a bit, so please forgive me." He was genuinely upset that his information had led to such a situation. He then mobilized all his connections, but no one had any useful information about dealing with such matters. The best he could come up with was vague information, like maybe there are certain conditions that, if met, cause these things to happen.